Good afternoon. I'm Caroline Fisher. I'm broadcasting this to you from my home. I run Caroline Fisher Projects, which is a small gallery in Norwich dedicated to ceramics. At the moment, I've got an exhibition which never actually opened of work by Lydia Hardwick and Holly Stevenson. So this afternoon I'm talking to Lydia Hardwick, who is one of the ceramicists in that show. So she's actually just sent a request to me, so I'm just waiting for her to join me, and I'm going to ask her a little bit about her practice.
Hi.
Hello Lydia, how are you?
Oh, hang on, your sound's gone a bit.
Okay, we might struggle with Wi-Fi connections and things like that, but we've got a few people watching, which is great. So hello everybody who's watching. So I'm not only joined by Lydia, I'm joined by one of her pots in the background here, which I brought along so that you can see something of her work. So yeah, it's great to connect with you, and lots of people seem to be watching us. So we can do this like one of my normal clay conversations in the gallery, even though we're not in the gallery. And I'll just start off by asking Lydia to introduce herself and maybe say a little bit about her art education and maybe how you came to start using clay.
Yeah, so I've been working with clay for about 12 years now, which is long enough to remember the days when clay wasn't quite as cool as it is now. It's become really quite trendy these days. So yeah, those were the days. My first time that I used clay was when I was at Camberwell College of Art, and I had the opportunity whilst actually on a sculpture degree to spend a month in a different department. So I went and spent a month in the ceramics department at Camberwell, and I just never left. So I completed my degree in ceramics. I then spent about a year as a secondary school teacher, and then I went on to do my master's degree at the Royal College of Art for 2 years. I graduated in 2013.
What was it about clay that drew you? What excited you about using clay?
I think I probably didn't realise this quite so clearly at the time, but I think that what it is that I like to work through the material first. I think that's the thing that I connect to in quite a kind of gut instinctual way. And I think that I like to work that way round, and the kind of the other things feed into it, but it always starts off with the material. And I think that's probably something that's always been a part of me since I was a very young person. Yeah.
Yes. So what sort of material ways of working do you use? I mean, I know that you don't throw on the wheel, do you? You're primarily a hand builder. So how do you start constructing your pieces?
Yeah, so I can't throw to save my life. I've tried about 4 times. I think I very quickly realised that it was something that you had to be really dedicated to if you wanted to get good at it. And I think I'm a little bit more of a sort of free range ceramicist. I like to work in quite a wide range of ways. So most of my big pots at the moment are coiled. Which is quite a meditative but an intensive process. When the pots are coiled, you have to be very careful, particularly when they're large, to make sure that you build things up in stages. So there's lots of sort of controlled drying going on, and then the handles, they dry faster than the rest of the pot, so you have to wrap up individual parts, and it's a real challenge.
What's the time frame roughly of making one of the larger pots then?
Sorry, say that again.
What's the time frame roughly of making one of your larger pieces?
Yeah, I think so sometimes I'll throw them over 2 days. So if it's a big pot like the one in the background, that might be done over a couple of days. I'll bring it up to like the halfway point first, and then I'll continue the next day. You do that because the bottom half of the pot needs to get firm enough to hold the weight of the upper part. But sometimes I'm really impatient. I want to knock it out in one go. I'm quite a kind of stubborn, impatient maker in a lot of ways. So yeah, I have things that were meant to be this shape that end up being very fat and round because you know, it starts to slump because I've been rushing it.
Yeah, so sometimes you have small disasters and have to sort of,
yeah, they always turn it into something else. So yeah.
They take on a bit of a life of their own as well. Then there's a bit of spontaneity where things sort of just go in a certain direction and you're led by the material.
Yeah, I think that the times that I enjoy making the most is when I'm not the shape isn't that predetermined and I just start doing it. I think that I think through the patterns that I'm applying to the surface a little bit more than you know, how I think about the form. The patterns have to be a little bit more planned through because, of course, you've I mean, for a start, it's a chemical process and colours change when they've been through the kiln. So oxides react to heat in different ways. And I think that you have to use a kind of your experience quite a lot in understanding how colours will work out. So there's a little bit of a different thought process that goes on with the colours. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so in terms of the decoration, first of all, the materials you use are different slips, is that right?
Yes, so the pot behind you would have probably about 15 layers of slip, and they're all stained with oxide. So I only use white slip, but I add into the slip oxides to make the colours. Occasionally I will use a little bit of oil paint or something else, so that pot in the background has some little red dots on it, and I'm really not against the idea of mixing other materials in. I'm not very precious like that. I just think I want things to look the way that I want them to.
You can get the effect from some other material, then you'll use it. So that's then fired at quite a low temperature, presumably, just to set off those slips, but without any glaze.
Yeah, so I think often I find with the oxides and the slips, they need a decent temperature to get what you want from them. So the pot in the background is the stoneware clay, so that would have been fired up to probably somewhere between 1240, 1260. But I also use terracotta clay a lot as well, and I kind of force the terracotta to a higher temperature than you would normally fire it, which is a bit risky, but I like this very kind of deep toasted colour that you get.
Yes, but the pots that are in the exhibition have that toasted terracotta clay, don't they? And you've decorated some of those with black and white. So you just get a little hint of the terracotta often on the rim where you see the kind of raw clay, and then the rest is decorated with the black and white slip, which is really lovely. It's a really great effect. So yeah, can you say a little bit about the body of work that you made for the exhibition and how that came about? What was the starting point for it?
Yeah, so I knew I'd be sharing the space with Holly Stevenson, the other artist, and Holly's work is very sculptural and was going to occupy a lot of the kind of central space. And so I knew that I wanted to have some of my own work that had volumes, which were in the form of various pots, but I also wanted to make the most of the wall space. So there is quite a few wall-based pieces in different formats, and I wanted to have an element that was quite experimental. So the pots themselves are quite fixed forms, and I wanted something to kind of balance that out. So one piece in particular that I think was a bit of a looser, more experimental piece was a series of fragments that vary between, you know, this size and this size, made from sheets of terracotta that I tear into pieces, and then I will paint black and white slips onto them in very instinctual kind of patterns that I really don't plan through at all. But a lot of the fragment shapes also related to the shapes on the pot. So the one in the background, those sorts of islands, like archipelago fragments. Yeah, the piece for the wall had a strong relationship to the pots.
Yeah, I'll put a picture of that on Instagram later, actually. But sadly, because the lockdown happened, I never got to hang that piece.
No, no. Oh,
Because I had a special wall set aside to put it on. But once I can get back down to the gallery,
will do. Yeah,
I'll hang
yeah.
it. And I think there are 30 fragments, but they're so beautiful. They all vary in size. So there are some quite large ones and some smaller ones, and everyone is different in terms of the pattern that's on it. So, and again, there's that nice contrast between the toasted terracotta clay, which you just glimpse around the sides of some of them, and the black and white pattern. So it's a completely black and white piece, and it occupies a space of about just over 1 metre wide and almost 1 metre high. So it's quite big. Put the whole thing up. And, really lovely, and quite a departure for you, I think, to make those sort of fragments and not to frame them, but to just make them as an installation effectively. Really interesting. But I suppose that leads us on to talk maybe about the decoration that you use. And I mean, one thing that really drew me to your work initially was the amazing pattern that you use, and how sometimes these patterns are more like textiles and sometimes they're more like writing. But how do you go about using pattern? What drew you to such an amazing response to pattern?
Yeah, so I tend to be drawn to patterns and motifs that are found within indigenous craft objects and textiles, as you say. And usually they are made by communities that attribute great expressive power to visual things, perhaps in a way that we don't so much in, I don't know, this society. I think that pattern in itself is a form of communication, and it appeals to us on a more of a subconscious level. We all have our own internal visual libraries and memories of patterns that we've seen, surfaces that we've seen, and I mean, like, most of my early memories are of surfaces and patterns. That's how I remember things from when I was very young. I never directly copy a pattern, but it's more like a regurgitation of experiences, and like a sort of melange of different things from the back of my brain. And sometimes they will come out looking like they are from some specific place, but other times they're this sort of strange amalgamation. And I enjoy the fact that different people will read into them in different ways.
I know you went to India not so long ago. So I mean, that must have been really inspiring to look at textiles and the amazing colours that are used all over the place in India. So I wondered how that affected your work, but also what other cultures you've looked at in terms of textiles, maybe, or ceramics.
Well, in India, I mean, of course, you're just like saturated with visual things and colour. I think, though, that the thing that really comforted me in India is the just fact that material is just so fundamental to people's day-to-day lives. You know, even simple things like, we walked down an alleyway and there was a tiny hole in a wall and a man was sitting in there screen printing crisp packets, the dates onto the crisp packets with, you know, screen printing. And I just thought it was so beautiful. And like, you know, everywhere you go, people are working with stuff. And so I found, that within sort of specific patterns and styles of work, it was more just this kind of really wholesome feeling of people working with things and material. But I think one memory in particular is of actually strangely visiting the British Council building in New Delhi. which was a collaboration between the Indian architect Charles Correa and Howard Hodgkin. And Howard Hodgkin had designed a kind of brush-stroked, very simple gestural pattern that then became a mural for the front of the building. So they translated his brush-stroked pattern into 3 different types of stone. There was a black stone, a white stone, and a kind of terracotta colour. And they had carved out his painted shapes and put them into the front of the building. I mean, that was really special seeing that building, and I feel a bit guilty saying that the British Council building was something that stood out to me, but it just seemed like this really good meeting point between lots of different sorts of ideas.
And the way that the painting of a sort of British artist had been translated into a very Indian sort of engagement materials, and the sort of touch of the craftsman to actually make that come alive on a large scale, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of, in a way, what I'm trying to do with my work is pulling in different contexts together, and I feel that, you know, they can therefore appeal to people in different ways.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you also about, you know, you mentioned that building in Delhi, but what other artists have influenced you or are you interested in?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for me to mention the significance of my conversations with my friends and peer group, actually. You know, it's really easy for me to leap towards the million different artists that I really love the work of. But, you know, I've got some really good friends who are very talented people. I mean, my friend Claire, she's an illustrator, Claire Harrop. She works 8 roads down from me, she lives, and works in her studio. I have great conversations with her. I've got an artist friend, Freya Douglas Morris, who I'm always chatting to about ideas. So that's really important. But the other one I wanted to mention, who is not my friend, unfortunately, is Annie Albers. Annie Albers, not just her work, but her writing, actually. When I came across her writing in this book called Selected Writings, it's just a book of short essays. I came across it about 7 or 8 years ago, I think. And it really reassured me, because the way she talks about making and making processes and the language that pattern, in her case through weaving, can communicate. I think it just really appealed to me. She talks about things in a really simple way, but with real clarity. And I can't recommend enough her short essays. They're really good.
I went to the Annie Albers exhibition at Tate, as I know you did, and I hadn't really thought that much about weaving before, but I was blown away by that exhibition. And actually, you mentioned to me about Annie Albers' writing the other day, and so I sort of started having a look on the internet, and I thought, oh, I'm sure I can do some interesting stuff. And it is just, it's amazing. And when you've seen her work as well, she really talks about material and understanding your materials in a very particular way, which I think is really significant if you're a maker. I mean, I also dabble in making in ceramics, and I think the way that you actually come to make what you make that is your style, your particular way of working, is only through understanding your material. And that's really what she talks about. That's one of the key things, I think.
I think,
isn't it?
You're right. Yeah, and I was just going to say how I think that you know, it's something I've struggled with for quite a long time, this idea that everything can stem from the material and the processes, you know, and that is a justification for making work in itself. I think coming from a background in fine art initially, of studying sculpture, I think that it was something that I felt very uncomfortable with, you know, the idea of being able to talk about my work in terms of the stuff I'm using. Is yeah, but so coming across her writing was quite a big deal for me, in feeling that what I was trying to do and the way that I was thinking was valid, and I think that we have, since me coming across her writing, things have changed actually. Generally, the kind of landscape for people working in craft has become a bigger, more blurred thing. And you know, I think I've said to you before how I feel like this idea of hierarchy and different classifications of work is actually quite a recent phenomenon. I think that actually humans historically have always just worked with materials in a variety of ways, and that they've all got equal value. And I think that people...
It was a kind of Renaissance thing, I suppose, that set up these boundaries between painting, sculpture, craft, you know, make goldsmith work, that sort of thing. That was all a kind of 15th, 16th century, 15th century, you know, phenomenon that separated everything out. And it's taken us sort of 500 years to start breaking those boundaries down.
And I think that
that people like you who have a fine art training have returned to what was traditionally a craft material, but done something with it which is very much out of the traditions of craft and fine art. You know, you're not making any distinction really, because you make these objects such as the pot behind me, which looks like a pot. I mean, it's very recognizable as what would have been a functional object, but actually the intention is not for it to have a function, because there's not glazed. You can't really carry liquid in it. You're not going to, you know, put it on your head full of water or anything like that. It's purely an object of contemplation and fine art.
Yeah, I think also pots in particular are really kind of fundamental human made form. You know, it's something that we've always tried to make in some form or another, even if that was just cupping our hands. So in that sense, I felt like it's a shape, a form that people can always relate to. Anyone can relate to a pot. And in that sense, they're sort of on one hand a sort of blank canvas, because they are the simplicity of them. And then on the other hand, they make a very deep connection to us somehow.
And they have endless possibilities as well, don't they? I mean, that shape can be adapted to almost anything you want to do with it, in so many different materials, not just ceramic. So I was going to, I was going to ask you next just about your, it's a bit of a leap, I suppose, in a way, but about your studio routine. So, you know, what is your routine? I know your studio is at home, so you're in the fortunate position of being able to carry on working during. So, yeah. You set
so just to mention, I think you're slightly breaking up there, Caroline. I think I got your question though, so I'm just going to carry on talking. So I have my studio in a spare bedroom at home, which is really useful because usually my life is spent, a large portion of my life is spent on the train actually. I commute into London for teaching work. So by having my studio at home, it means I can fit my making around popping out for teaching. So actually this cold kind of lockdown situation has really changed my studio routine, because I'm just working all day every day now, which is, I mean, it's really quite new to me to be able to do that. Hence the rate at which I'm throwing pots out at people.
It's great.
But
being really productive, and sounds like you're kind of quite enjoying it in a way. I mean, we're all in a difficult
Yeah.
situation in one way or another, but
Yeah, I mean, obviously everything that's going on is awful, but I'm just trying to see it for myself as an opportunity. I absolutely love teaching though. Some of my best friends are people that I've taught and got to know over the years, and some of them are listening, so hello. And
they're little schools.
yeah, yeah, I really miss teaching, but this is a chance for me just to really go for it with my own making.
Yeah.
I mean, luckily for us, we have got a garden, and we're both, me and my partner William, are keen gardeners, so we've been doing a lot of that. And yeah, we quite like our home environment, so we're all right.
Yeah.
We're
Well,
doing okay. We're
quite
lucky.
yeah, that's great. And yes, so I don't know if anybody who's watching has any questions for Lydia, but if they do, they can always just type them in, and I'll ask her. Lots of people waving, which is really nice. But yes, I would like to ask you finally if there are things that you want to try in the future. Have you got things that you want to, projects that you want to undertake, or things that you can't do at the moment that you might do after
Yeah,
lockdown ends?
yeah. An obvious one would be scale, but I thought that was too obvious and kind of boring for me to mention. Obviously, it'd be nice to try and make some really big things at some point. The thing that in the near future I'd like to try more of is it's hard to describe. I have a few friends who are illustrators and painters, and when I ever get the chance to see them work, they have this kind of really convincing way of making fluid gestures. It sounds simple, but it's like years of holding a brush and moving that allows them to make this very convincing mark. So what I was going to say is that I would like in the near future in my work to try and translate a little bit more of that loose gesture, not just in the decoration of the surface, but also the form. I want to work a little bit more freely. That's not to say that I'm not going to carry on with what I'm doing, but I think, yeah, I'm going for the gesture.
Yeah, that sounds really like quite a departure for you, because it feels like a lot of your work is quite well planned out and well structured. But yes, one thing I've got just here is one of your plates. Actually, can I show this? But so with some of your plates where you paint onto the surface like this.
Yeah,
They feel kind of freer in terms of mark making, more
yeah,
more
yeah.
spontaneous, I suppose. So maybe that sort of thing in terms of decorating. But how might you do that in terms of making, do you think?
Well, I had a go at it recently with I was talking about the Howard Hodgkin and Charles Correa building. Howard Hodgkin, if you just there's a few films of where you see a little tiny bit of him working. He's just
Some of those, yeah,
so
it is amazing.
free but determined. I mean, I tried making some similar marks to this building that I saw onto some plates, and yeah, I'm still not there, I don't think, but I think that it's one of those things where you just have to do a hell of a lot of it for it to become convincing, I think.
And particularly with working on clay, because I mean, as I know from my work, I use cobalt to sort of paint decoration onto clay.
Yeah.
You can't make mistakes, you have to be bold, don't you? And if it goes wrong, then that's it. There's no
Yeah.
rubbish.
You can't
You
tear
have
up the paper and throw it in the bin. Yeah,
but
it's
it goes
yeah.
back to what you said earlier on as well. You have to then go with what you've done and maybe turn it into something different.
Yeah, I think you're right though. It's a whole different kind of game putting these marks onto ceramic, because it is so fixed and finalized. You can't rub it out.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I've just got a question that's come up actually from Natalie DeGrow, who asks, can you talk a little bit about your inlaid works, the process that you use to inlay clay?
Yes, so that is a process that I thank you for that question, by the way. That is a process that I use quite a lot. It basically involves taking a clay body and staining it different colours with oxides. So I make a little kind of pot and I put the oxide in the middle and turn the oxide into a paste, and then I'll work the colour into the clay until it becomes stained and solid. And then once you've got all your colours, the way I do it is I roll out a flat sheet of clay, and then I roll out all my colours to be flat as well. And from those flat sheets, I'll cut out shapes, and I almost create like a sort of collage. So I will place different coloured shapes onto the surface and build them up and press them into the surface of the clay so that the colour actually becomes embodied within the sheet of clay below it. Yeah, I make a lot of work that way, particularly kind of big plates. It's a little bit trickier to do that process on volume for, you know, pots and things, because you tend, well, I at least tend to work as flat sheets, and then as soon as you start working with those, you'll kind of, you end up smudging the colour, and it all goes a bit wrong.
Yeah.
So I like to work with flatter pieces, yeah, in that technique.
Yes, I guess it makes it simpler. And they're often quite carpet-like, aren't they, those pieces, the way they end up. I feel that they have quite a textile sort of look to them, which I really love. Somebody else asked a question actually about the shape of your. Is there an African influence in your work at all?
Caroline, sorry.
Did you get that?
No, I got a bit of it.
Oh,
you say it again.
Somebody else has asked a question about the shape of your pots. What influences the shapes that you make, and whether there's an African influence in your work at all?
Yeah, quite. I've had quite a lot of people, you know, say that they see a sort of African influence in some of the shapes and the patterns I use, and yes, for sure. You know, I spend hours going around places like the British Museum and the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. I absolutely love, and a lot of the things I'm drawn to are often, particularly from the Congo. There was an excellent exhibition in Norwich, actually, at the Sainsbury Centre. It was a kind of selection of works pulled together alongside the work of the potter. I'm trying to remember her first name. Her surname's Odundo.
Magdalena Odundo.
Yeah, Magdalena. Magdalena Odundo. Yeah, so she. They had her work alongside things that have influenced her, and there were lots of pieces from the Congo in particular, textile works, but also you know, carved wood pieces that I'm often drawn to. But equally, I'd say there's a huge amount of South American work from craft from indigenous groups in South America that I'm really drawn to, like Anasazi pottery. And I would say that nothing is ever a really specific direct influence. It's always bringing different things together.
Yeah. You're a sponge. You go around museums and the internet, and all these things kind of feed into your consciousness, as I think happens with a lot of artists, and then it kind of comes out into your work through the filter of your brain, really, doesn't it? And you know, you're constantly taking things on board and probably sometimes unconsciously as well. You know, you take them on board and they come out in your work.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because, you know, I never want to try and replicate the work of something from somewhere else, because I couldn't even possibly begin to imagine the significance of that thing or that pattern for that group of people. So you know, sometimes these things have religious significance. It's very tricky, but you know, there's also nothing new under this sun, in the sense that sometimes I'm looking at a pattern from Africa somewhere, and then it will be exactly the same as a pattern in South America that I've come across. And you know, I think that we kind of return to these patterns in a really fundamental, basic way sometimes, which means they end up everywhere. But yeah, I'm mindful that you have to be very careful of you know, cultural appropriation, and
Yeah.
it's a tricky one. And you know, I'm really happy to have conversations with anyone who thinks about that a lot, because it's something that I have to think about.
Yeah, I think it's a very fascinating area, but as you say, the idea of being respectful to, you know, the different sources that you maybe look at,
Yeah,
is important, isn't it? And just recognizing that everybody has their own sort of culture, right? Makers are no different to everybody. Help us understand it.
yeah. Caroline, I got about 50% of what you just said, I think.
Yes, I
I'll
think
smile anyway.
it's
Yeah,
a little bit. But it's been brilliant to talk to you this afternoon, Lydia.
thank
And
you.
I mean, we could carry on for longer, but I think my husband's just got on the lawnmower and it's starting to get a bit noisy around here.
Yeah.
But it's really lovely to see so many people listening in as well. And if anyone wants to ask any more questions at a later date, I'm sure you'll be happy to answer on Instagram, won't
Yeah.
you? And thanks for everybody who's had a look at the feed this afternoon. And the exhibition, I hope, will be able to actually open in Norwich at some point. Hoping that things are going to relax a little bit in terms of the lockdown over the next couple of months, and then we can open it up. But it's been really great to show your work, and I've really enjoyed the
Thank you.
responses from all these people. Yeah, thank you very much, and hope to see you in person soon. And
Yeah.
everybody who's been watching as well.
Thanks, Caroline. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.